Sure.
Question, did you guys do much with adding additional comments about fields to better describe or how to help the model understand what the different fields do, or were your comments just blank?
So there's a couple of different ways to answer that. One is inside of FileMaker, when you have the description on a field, when you're defining fields, I did add some comments to some of that, and then I didn't in others. And when I was inspecting the JSON payload from MCP server, it doesn't reference that. So it doesn't matter.
And Louis said they're going to add that.
Okay.
They haven't yet. They're going to make it so that the comment in the schema auto-populates into the MCP server, but that's a near future feature.
Right. But further down the line, when you're in the MCP server, you can pop up that tool and inspect its report on your tables and columns, and you can add that information. I didn't on any of the tables. I did on the scripts. And the reason why I did on the scripts is because of the way we phrase things, right? Restock, there's no restock field in the table, right? It just simply says merchandise amount or something like that. So I went and I added words in vernacular to the script parameters to give the model a little bit of a hint of what is required and what is needed. To actually further double click on that, you can tell it certain script parameters are required, right? The user ID, super important, is required, right? But what if you're doing a situation where I don't want the user ID, I don't always know the user ID, maybe I know my login name. And so maybe what's required is either the user ID or my username. You can't put required on both because it would then require both. So what I did was I didn't mark them as required, but I, in the description, said in both places, either the user ID or the username is required. I put that in both places. So the model now knows I got to go find one of those two things. The script itself, of course, goes and looks, and if it finds one, it infers the other, and it spits back a complaint if you don't do it. But yeah, that's so you can add that kind of detail, and it's important sometimes. Right.
Then you mentioned that it's off premises. So it's a two-part question, I think. First, what's the timelines that you will put for on premises encrypted? And secondly, is multi-layer authentication model if you want to big select give your customer routing information on one deliveries.
So for the first question, what I'm hearing is, I don't know. Timeline. You're asking about when are we going to be able to install an MCP server on-prem. There are other MCP server technologies that today you can install. You can go to modelcontextprotocol.io, I think, and download one and configure it yourself. And that does take some amount of time to basically manually type out all that JSON because it's not going to do the business of looking at your FileMaker solution and auto-populating all that for you. That solution, Claris MCP, they have said we're looking into it. And so they are very aware that everyone wants it. At this point, I would even argue people are screeching for it. So I hope that turns up the heat a little bit, and maybe we'll send them a copy of this recording and say, Mike asked, where is that? I would love it. I would absolutely. I would have demoed on that if it was available today, because that would be our preferred rollout. But you were saying, what was the part B of your question?
Well, if you have to go to a public internet, I don't want my customers to have their information exposed. In fact, with multiple level authentication, people would say, when do you burn and handle, here's your user ID. I saw that and I went, oh my God.
Sure.
I want to have multiple level authentication popping back to your cell phone or something. Is this you? Where I gave you that answer.
And I agree.
AD, I believe, for authenticating with the individual accounts.
Yeah.
As far as that goes.
Yeah.
Believe it or not.
I agree. To certain corners were cut just to make the demo fit inside of this. So that is a great example. I could have said, my name is Steve Sikora. What are my earnings for last week?
A follow-up question to like the first part of your answer is when I played with those MCP models, I was playing with a very cursory, not like you guys are. But it occurred to me pretty quickly that if you sent them a bunch of related Excel spreadsheets, then you could get them to work much easier. So we transfer right now our FileMaker data you export to Excel, and Excel you encrypt, and then you do it that way
Yeah.
with those models.
Yeah. And I even created an Excel spreadsheet of a bunch of revenue reports, and I screenshot it and sent it to them. And
That worked.
yeah, it worked.
To get back to the authentication point a little bit, how the Claris MTP works is that it uses FileMaker credentials to talk to FileMaker. As a layer of security, you definitely want a user's MCP to be associated to their user so that they only have access to their records, whatever tables that user has access to. That way, you can add a FileMaker script or something that is essentially, what's my user? And if you ask the LLM, what's my user, it'll use FileMaker functions to get that data.
But I don't want to have my customers getting access to my FileMaker. I want to give them reports on that. Let's say we have customer tickets going back 25 years in FileMaker. Like 21 years. 21 years of FileMaker. And so I can get a history internally of what happens with different functions and systems and different problems. But my customers might want to see, okay, this is the failure rate in this rack for the last 5 years. We have that information, but how would I give that information to a customer and not let it get out there on MCP? I can't give 100,000 people credentials and manage them. Do a full-time job.
That would be. Yep. And right now, that's the limitation we're at. There isn't a way to get credentials in a session like that and pass those through on a per instance basis. It's like you have to set up the connection to do that. And that's the limitation of Claris MCP, and you would hope that they would roll something out like that because other MCP servers have it. So you would hope that they would roll something out like that soon.
Just thinking through this for the first time, if I understand correctly, Claris MCP generates a token that we give to the client, and that's how the client, in our case LibreChat, is able to authenticate with Claris MCP.
Right.
Then Claris MCP is using a specific user account with FileMaker or FileMaker file.
Yes.
And so any interaction that we're having with the FileMaker file is using that Claris MCP user account.
That is correct.
And so if we wanted that to be truly individual, one person is one account, we essentially have to set up a unique context per person. So we'd have to think through what's the amount of data that we're exposing, that we're comfortable with exposing. Are we okay with that being all users or a specific set of user roles, or
Right.
how granular do you want to be? Whereas we can set up one MCP server and say, hey, pass through authentication,
Right.
and then enforce the permissions of what was passed through. That's the missing thing.
That's missing today.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it.
To give it a different context, we use UTrack internally as a project management tool. We have set up there is an MCP server for that product. And the way it works is I go into LibreChat and I go to connect to that MCP server, which is a generic piece of information. It's just a URL. And then it says, what is your user token? I have to go into UTrack and create for myself a user token and supply it. Now it knows that I'm talking to it. And I can't say, my name is Steve. What are my tickets? It's going to say, no, your name is not Steve. I know exactly who you are. This is your token. That would be nice if that was available today, but it's not available today in Claris.
Yeah, not built in, because you could just theoretically set up a bunch of scripts to do that, right? Have a users table maintained, create tokens for the users, and give it to folks to use to query their data. And then you have subsequent scripts that use that as a filter to data without having to setting up users within the FileMaker file, but you could potentially brute force a token similar to how you could brute force a password or something. So
Yeah. So it's not baked in. You can
users
roll your own.
table. Yeah.
But it would be nice if it was
Yeah.
part of the product. So there.
I have a question that gets at the why we share, I think. Can you share, willing, how many hours were spent building this, the solution that Brian demonstrated, and how would you compare that to the hours that we're now not going to get paid for building a custom solution with like custom web pages and to do the same work?
So I will answer the first part because I built the file and the scripts.
Which is notable in and of itself. You're not on the database.
I am not. I'm not. And I will
Good script hygiene.
I will readily admit that as much as you can vibe code FileMaker, I vibe coded those scripts to figure some things out because I'm like, I don't even know how to do this. And at the time, Steve was out of town, so I'm like, I'm just gonna ask Rock, and it actually got 90% there. But so it took me about a day to basically create all the tables and the fields and the relationships that I wanted to. Even clean them up and colorize them because I knew you would look at that and say. And then I wrote, what was it, 8 scripts or 9 scripts or something like that. So it took me about a day. Actually, I was in the car being driven to my daughter's gymnastics meet, and I did it in that long trip from here to Lubbock. Then it took me about an hour and change when I sucked it into the MCP server at Claris to notate things in a way that I felt like I liked the responses I was getting. And yeah, so call it day and a half of working and tweaking. So yes, I would say that normally you go and you create buttons. And that's the other thing about that chart. It's super clean. I know that we do all kinds of very creative things by creating a relationship to extended tables and things so that we can do neat things with the UI and all that. And so it's free of a lot of that kind of stuff. Right. And I would even argue if you were going to do MCP on a given solution, you might actually want to create a separate file and suck over just the table occurrences and make it really clean and point the MCP, the Claris MCP at that. Right. That way it's not tripping all over the 800 instances of something. But yes, so I didn't spend any time on the GUI at all. And know that if this was for a client, I would not have then billed and gotten paid for that. I understand that. One would hope, though, that the client would find utility in getting that to them faster, and that there's a subset of their population that now can be serviced by how quickly that got put out. And now my job as a developer is not just sitting in front of GUI panels in FileMaker Pro, but I now am a prompt engineer. So I'm going to go because the manager wanted a report and he asked for it in vernacular that makes sense to an accountant but no one else. And so I need to tweak the prompts and make the system understand that. So I don't see this replacing the jobs that we were doing before. I see it making things faster. I see it being a workflow that is potentially usable in certain circumstances, not all circumstances. And I see it being us being able to deliver things faster. That's how I look at it. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, because I definitely see it as a productivity increase. You definitely don't want the the LLM to just do whatever it can. There's certain things that are like workflow driven. So I'm filing a report, we're putting data into fields, and we definitely want to do some field validations, like the ID should exist, and the user that is doing the report should be who they say
So
they
if
are.
I understand correctly, it's not just doing the AI job of figuring out what it is you really need to have happen in the background on your behalf based on your human speak, but it's limiting its actions to that which you have defined for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So
Yeah.
it can't just go, like you were saying, Matt, if it doesn't have a table that what you're asking for really suggests, it's going to give you an alternate suggestion of where you could put that information, because it can't just go like add a table of its own and
Yeah.
do that kind of stuff on its own.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Can't do that.
Not yet. Let me move on.
No,
It's
I mean, ODAD will let you do it.
if you're paying any sort of attention at all about what folks are doing with LLMs and stuff, there are constant horror stories about people giving full access to their databases with LLMs, and then I'm awesome. I gave my LLM full access to my database. I built the solution in 2 hours. Next day. So does anybody have... does anybody know how to recover databases? Software table.
Rollback.
What are we supposed to do here?
I remember a story where somebody got a traffic ticket or had to file something with to pay a traffic ticket or something with the city, and they used like drop table or something in the form submission, and it supposedly did it. I don't know if that's old wives' tale.
And there's
Accommodating.
there's also some things are better just as a GUI with buttons, and you don't necessarily want to make every workflow through text, through human speech. It is sometimes just easier to see a big old table with a button that is accept and reject, and click accept, reject.
I just so happened to have watched some of Spider-Man 2 last night, and the villain is a guy who had AI-driven, arms attached to him, and it did not go well.
Noted.
So we were using Claude Opus hosted in Beth. Could we have done this? It wouldn't have been identical, obviously, given the probabilistic nature and the difference in model, but could we have used a local model hosted on our machine with Claris MCP server as it sits today? And what would the differences have been?
We tried Nova at one point, which is also Bedrock, but just a different model from Amazon. And so the responses that came back were generally the same sort of at their core, but what came back was not formatted as tables. It didn't feel like a conversation. It wasn't as useful.
Okay.
And so using Claude was in that case.
Yes. And early on when I was playing with it, I used, we have a copy of Quinn hosted on that Mac Studio. So I told LibreChat to use that. And it got some pretty good answers and was a little bit slower than the massive server farm they have there at AWS land. What I didn't necessarily like about the Quinn was that some of the inferences and recalling of tools was a lot more wordy. And so what took, 5 calls to answer the question of how many cells did I give or whatever it was? It took the Quinn about 8 or 9 and it recalled several times, which was curious. And for the purpose of the demo, just went with the one that was fastest. Yep. But yes, we did use Quinn on there. I had considered pulling one of the GPT models in to see how well I did, but once we landed on Claude being pretty good at this particular tool calling thing, I just hung down it.
So now, so the Claris MCP server, though, in the cloud somewhere, we know it's in AWS based on Claris's
In the West Coast.
Yeah. But in the cloud somewhere, if it's talking to a server on-prem, we've got to what? We got to open up access via firewall. It's a webhook. How does it work?
No,
Because
so
that's not the direction of the call. Yeah. You want to...
yeah, so the call happens from whatever your client is.
LibreChat's talking here first.
Yes,
Okay.
LibreChat is talking to the LLM, wherever that may be. And when it goes and uses a tool call, it initiates it from the LibreChat server. So because Claris MCP is cloud hosted only, it needs to go then and reach out to Claris's servers to then talk to FileMaker servers. Now, if we had a self-hosted version, then the chat client can then talk to that self-hosted version, talk to self-hosted FileMaker, get back data from FileMaker, and then we'd be running entirely locally.
Okay, so last kind of detailing there then. If I've got a local FileMaker server, and by the way, was this in our AWS space, or where was this FileMaker?
It was in our AWS space. Yeah.
Okay.
It was our.
But our AWS space has a firewall and it's locked down. It's not publicly accessible. What do we have to do to let Claris MCP talk to that server?
Port 443.
Okay.
Turn on OData, turn on Data API.
And that's where, before it's going to be able to talk, we also have to add the user to file.
And I had to add, yeah.
Because it's got to authenticate in.
That's correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. You had to turn on the data API or just OData?
It's both.
You need both.
Yeah, because there's a couple things that OData doesn't support yet that they're still dependent on the data API for, like specifically images. And then I think it's script calling.
Yeah.
Yeah. They've said they want to get there, but they're.
In the chat,
Okay.
yeah, in the chat for thinking models, when you notice it would say thinking periodically while I was working everything out, you can expand those and you can see what, at least a little bit of what gets sent back and forth. And a lot of that's just payload stuff, FileMaker table IDs, field IDs. But there's also filters, and you'll notice that sometimes the sort of payload or the structure of what gets sent or what's in that thinking block looks a lot like OData because it is OData, and other times it looks more like Data API. So that's interesting. I actually skipped over that. I was intending to show you guys that.
How about you go, Joel?
Yeah, so this is one of the thinking blocks for filing the maintenance report, which returns a script result in that case. There's another one that I think was, I believe it was one of these. Yeah, this multi-tool call. Yeah, so this one, if anybody here has used OData, this will look very like something you've seen before. The syntax, this is an OData filter syntax, is exactly what you would put in the $filter parameter in an OData file. The FileMaker table IDs get returned as a result. Did you mention that in one of our earlier FMPugs that I didn't know?
I don't think we.
This is a more recent phenomenon that comes back with, that can be enabled. So when you do an OData call, you can have it return the ID number of a table, and you can have it return IDs for fields as well. So if you have built something and you've got it in production, but you need at some point to change the name of a table, which would be terrible, or a field, that would, if you're calling it that way, everything's going to break.
But that number persists.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And this kind of syntax is what the local models or the open source models are having a little bit of trouble doing. That's why it takes more calls to do it. You can definitely get away with using a smaller and local model, but you do have to also provide it way more context as to how to run these tools properly, because otherwise it's just going to keep making up syntax for the filter or whatever else.
Yeah, I was giving it really short prompts. I need to restop.
And it will get better over time. Matt mentioned Quen that we're playing with. Quen 3.5 just came out, and it's a lot better at tool calls than 3 was. So I expect that they'll keep working to improve tool calls, and we'll be able to get away with running less.
A quick question. Until field comments are added to the schema that gets sucked in by the MCP, you mentioned, Matt, that you can add those comments, but let's say you have, like most of our systems are, they're living and growing, so you have a new build, got a new copy of the file, and there have been additional things, you want that to go into the MCP as well. Is that going to replace what you had and you lose your comments, you got to add them back?
If you use, I don't know. My thought is that what might actually end up happening is when you, do we have that? Another tab. Voluminous tabs. My thought is that when it pulls information in from your server, because you have created a context, just make sure we're not on theirs, but on ours. There we go. When you create a new context, and then when you create a new connection, and I can't do that because I'm not in edit mode, but when you create that new connection, it's going to re-pull And I think it's probably not going to replace just automatically. I think it's like once you create that connection, it pulls what's there right now.
Okay.
So a new build would probably mean a new connection, probably mean a new token that you've had to distribute.
Tail.
They worked out their site license thing and like Claire's ID, so that the people that have site licenses aren't so screwy.
I am the absolute worst person to talk about licensing or how Claire's does things like that because I just simply go and then I ask Fred.
I just have this site licensing there. We've got full access to everything with them. So that would be anecdotally, yes, but I don't specifically know for sure. Which
I like to hear that. If it's that'll work.
Which licenses are offer access to this MCP and
The site licenses and SBA were the only ones that were a problem.
Yeah.
it's not SBA. SBA is no. Hey, I heard that on CCL.
Yeah, okay.
But I think site license is yes.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go tackle it. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Anything else?
Any questions from the field, Paul?
No.
All right, great.
Guys?